Okay, so why the picture of Marilyn Manson in the thumbnail? Well, partly because I'm an official YouTube grifter. That's the sort of thing apparently gets viewers. But there is a real reason. As you may or may not know, Mr. Manson was being sued for certain nefarious misconduct of the sort that YouTube does not like me mentioning. However, the claim was initially struck out because it was past limitation. However, the claimant has said and made an application saying, because of what I suffered and endured, all my memories were repressed and I've only just remembered all this happened. So time should not start running from when the incident happened. It should start running from when I remembered the incident happened. But what is limitation? Limitation, like I say, it's you are given a certain amount of time from a wrongdoing to actually bring any claim about it. And the rationale is people can't have potential claims hanging over them forever, and also for practical reasons, like evidence disappears, memories fade. So what's sort of typical limitation period? In England and Wales, it's 6 years for a lot of things, breach contracts, negligence, that sort of thing. 3 years though for personal injury, and it's actually 2 years if it's personal injury on a boat or an aircraft. And that catches a lot of people out, much to the delight of insurance companies. For defamation, it's 1 year, because the rationale there is, well, if you're that bothered about your reputation, you'll jump on it quickly to sort things out. And for fraud and breach of trust, it can be 12 years. But when does it run from? When do you start the clock? You start the clock generally from the first date you could have brought a claim. So let's do it by way of example. You lend some money to somebody and you say, just pay us back next year. You're not really that bothered about it. However, 7 years down the line, you suddenly decide, I want my money back. Say, he gives that money back, and they refuse. Well, if you issue a claim, because you could have actually asked for that money back and sued if they didn't return it after 1 year, that's when the limitation runs from. So if you've gone 6 years beyond that date, it's tough. But what if you just say to somebody, you just lend them the money, and you say, I'll pay us back whenever. You don't set a date, but then eventually years later you say, any chance of that money? And they refuse. Well, in that case, limitation starts from the date you demanded the money back, because that's the first day you could have sued. Sometimes, like I said, there's this thing about notice. That's what we've got in the Manson case, is what if an injury or a wrongdoing is committed, but you don't either find out about it until afterwards, or the harm doesn't crystallise, as we say, till afterwards. I mean, this crops up with things like, the asbestos cases and the radiation cases when they sort of, tested the atom bomb and all the troops were stood there. It was years later that they became ill, and it took quite a long time before people realised what might have caused the illness. So in that particular case, they said limitation starts from when we were able to say this was actually the cause of it, even though the actual wrongdoing, exposing them to that, had happened years and years and years before. Similarly with children, they get limitation starts running from their 18th birthday. I mean, they can theoretically sue through sort of, their next friends or their litigation friends, even when they are children. However, if that doesn't happen, then they get the limitation period clocks up from when they're 18. You get some other little weird things, because you get, like in defamation, for instance, it runs from the date of the statement, and the mere fact that the person then repeats the statement, that doesn't reset the clock. It used to do, but it doesn't now. And you do get into weird things about where you have an ongoing action. Say, for instance, you want to sue somebody for nuisance. You've got like a neighbour who's burning, has bonfires or something like that, or burning old tyres, and they do it on a regular basis. Do you sue them from the first date they did it? Do you sue them from, any of the times that they did it? And you get into sort of weird arguments about this, and I know this the hard way, because I had this on a nuisance case about a restaurant next door to somewhere. And we were saying, well, it's an ongoing nuisance, so we just basically got sick to death of it. We hadn't resolved it, so we're suing now. And they said, well, actually, no, because this was actually a criminal prosecution, so it was a 6-month limit. They said, you should have done it the first time that the nuisance occurred. which I actually thought was a bit, because that's making people just rush to court, and we're not supposed to do that sort of thing. But these are all issues that you need to be aware of. There have been a few incidences of cases where statutes have been passed to, get rid of the limitation period for a short time. That's happened in some states with certain types of offending, because they said, well, back in the old days, we can understand why people didn't want to bring claims, because, the culture was so much different back then, in the pre-Me Too days. So there has been a little bit of, in a few places, they said, okay, we're just going to have a short period where, say, even though your claims are out of time, you can actually bring them, so long as you bring them within this period. Similarly, we had that with in the art world with Holocaust looted art, because the limitation can be a big problem there, because obviously, all the stuff was looted sort of 80 years ago, and people have only just found out what's happened to things. Now, theoretically, limitation runs from notice. So if your painting went missing 80 years ago, your family's painting, and then you spot it in an auction 70 or 80 years later, limitation runs from when you spotted it. But it's not just when you spotted it, it's when you could have spotted it. And I've mentioned before about the Liz Taylor case, where she's got a Holocaust looted painting that she was given as a wedding present, and the family eventually found out about it. But because her wedding had been reported in all these sort of celebrity magazines at the time, they said, well, actually it mentioned the painting there, so that's the first date you could have been on notice. We're not saying that, we accept you didn't see any of these articles, but you could have done. So that's when time should have started running. And people thought, well, that's not really very fair. So some legislation was passed that said for a period of a few years, we're going to suspend limitation, and if you do want to sue for Holocaust looted art, then you can do so. But yeah, I mean, like I say, limitation catches a lot of people out. You can go to the court if you miss limitation, if you miss the date for whatever reason. You can apply for limitation to be suspended. But in this country, England and Wales, the courts are really, really strict about it, actually. Especially if you've got lawyers, they just say, well, your remedy lies elsewhere, notify your lawyers and they can notify their insurers. I mean, like I said, it is a very, very, very strict thing. So be very, very careful with limitation, because you think, 3 years, 6 years, 12 years, that's a long time. But it can be surprising just how quickly that can catch up with you. So it'll be very interesting, like I say, to see with this Manson case. All they've actually said is, well, we'll allow the argument. I mean, it's still not saying whether the trial will go ahead. But there you go. As always, hope you found that vaguely useful, vaguely interesting. A little view of the coast for you there. People keep asking where I do these. This is a place called Mylor Harbour, which I quite like, not least because the yacht club itself is quite nice for food, but there's also a little pub called Castaways, where I am now going to go and edit this and have a coffee. So there you go. See you next time.